Well, look, thank you everyone for coming. Welcome to our very first AFSA Solidarity Economies session. Before we start, I want to acknowledge that we meet on the lands of many First Nations. In my case, it's the Jinnabara people of the Sunshine Coast and the South Burnett in Queensland, Australia. I acknowledge that their sovereignty over this land was never ceded, and that as we discuss ethics and land use and sovereignty, we're discussing concepts that Indigenous people have well understood for tens of thousands of years. If you'd like, it'd be really great if participants could share the traditional owners of the country that they're on in the chat. We'd be really interested to see that, and that'd give us an idea of where you all come from as well. My name's Nick. I farm grass-fed beef, pastured eggs, free-range pork, garlic, a couple of other bits and pieces on a small farm in Queensland. And I'm also on the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance Committee. AFSA is a farmer-led organisation that fights for the right to nourishing and culturally appropriate food, produced and distributed in ecologically sound, ethical ways, along with our right to collectively determine our own food system. Really important human rights for everyone. We're a fighting organisation. We've had significant wins for our members, including legislative change at a local and state government level that have really supported small farms and ethical eaters as we do the things that we do. We've also got a seat at the table at the UN Food and Agriculture Organisation through our association with the International Planning Committee for Food Sovereignty. And we're also a member of a global network of peasants and Indigenous people, La Via Campesina. The only reason that we can do all of this and that we can win on issues that are really important to you guys is because we've got a strong and active membership. They only listen to us when we all stand together. And we really need to add your voice to these campaigns. So that we're asking that after this session, you jump on afsa.org.au if you're not already an AFSA member and join up. We would absolutely encourage you to do that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So look, before we get down to the very serious business of changing the world one mouthful at a time, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. I've said it a million times already, but if you're not a speaker or asking a question, could you please mute your microphone and turn off your camera? That'll save a bit of bandwidth for folks who are struggling with internet connections. The whole second half of this session will be questions from the audience. So please keep your thinking caps on about things that you'd like to know more about, or things that would help you as an ethical eater, or things that would help you as a farmer thinking of setting up a CSA. We'll also be monitoring the chat as we go along. So if something's a bit unclear, post a message, but save your long questions for the end or for the second half. All right, let's get down to it. So what is a solidarity economy? I've heard it described, I think really aptly, as an ecosystem of existing processes, many of which are flourishing all over the world right now. There's no time like the apocalypse for looking at ways of engaging in a type of commerce that's not to the detriment of people, animals and land. We're going to run a series of these discussions over the next few weeks. Our next one is in a fortnight's time, and we'll again talk about that a bit at the end. But tonight's session is about community-supported agriculture. And we're very lucky to have three really excellent speakers on this topic, Tammi, Ant and Dan. I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment. And I know online we've got a really vast range of experience and context. Yeah, we've got some very experienced CSA farmers in the webinar today. We've also got a lot of folks who are just dipping their toes in the water. So we are hoping that this is relevant to everyone. And at the end of the session, we're going to talk about what we can do to work together to get more information that we need. All right, I'm going to start by handing over to Tammi, our AFSA president, and she's going to spend a few moments filling us in on what we mean when we talk about community-supported agriculture and how that fits into the concept of a solidarity economy. So, Tammi, take it away.
Thanks, Nick. Great intro. It's really exciting to be here with everyone at the first of the Solidarity sessions. I think that at the time of the lockdown and the pandemic has been hard for many, but also opportunities arising for us to form more solidarity. And CSA is a pretty long-standing form of solidarity between farmers and eaters. So the term actually came from America, but the practice started in Japan in the 70s. And the Japanese organic farmers sort of came together and decided that they wanted a more kind of manifesto to what they were trying to do in working with communities of eaters. And so they wrote something called the Teikei Principles, which are in a little book that AFSA produced last year called Farming Democracy. And the principles include things like the principle of mutual assistance. You're probably hearing a lot about mutual aid right now, and groups arising for various ways of looking after each other. Principle of accepting the produce. None of this, I won't have a wonky carrot or a blemished tomato. You know, you take what's offered. The principle of mutual concession in the price decision. So actually, you're making an agreement together on what is a fair price. And I think Ant will probably talk about that tonight, because he's done some really innovative stuff in democratic price setting. Principle of deepening friendly relationships. So CSA is very much about relationships rather than transactions. You're not just selling produce to a person and then they go away and that's the last you know of them. You form a relationship with the people who eat your food, and they form their relationship with the farm, and it becomes their farm. I know my own members refer to our farm as their farm, and I think that's fantastic, the ownership that they feel of what we do here. The principle of self-distribution. So there are a lot of really different ways that CSAs distribute the produce, whether it's through farm gate pickups or members helping deliver to other members, or whatever the way is that suits your location and your members' needs. The principle of democratic management. So that's not just in price setting, but also in other aspects of the CSA. So like we've talked in our CSA about helping local low socioeconomic groups by having a subsidy attached to our CSA memberships. And that was done through a collective discussion at our open day, and then a vote amongst everyone. The principle of learning among each group. So, you know, the farmer has to commit to teaching the eaters about the produce that they're getting, about how it's raised, how the animals are raised, or the vegetables or the fruit is raised, whether there's any chemical involved in that or not. CSA is not necessarily organic, although it's certainly the majority of CSAs are, if not certified, operating relatively organically. That's a much bigger topic. The principle of maintaining the appropriate group scale. So I think scale is a really important consideration in CSA, and we should definitely talk about that tonight. What is an appropriate scale? And the principle of steady development. I love that. It's this idea that we're all constantly trying to develop better farming practices, better community reciprocity, better understanding about how to cook the food, better understanding what your members don't want from how you raise your animals, like hearing from them, like I'm a pig and cattle farmer, do they have concerns about castration? If we share all the information about why we do that, do they now no longer have concerns, or do those concerns remain? And do we need to take that on board as a management practice that perhaps is unacceptable? You know, so these are ongoing discussions with the membership, and central to the CSA concept is that you're sharing risk as well as reward. So in essence, you sign up for a season or a year in advance, and in some systems you pay for that entire season or year in advance, and in others it might be a monthly payment. It depends on the system. For example, vegetable farmers have a lot more upfront seasonal costs, and livestock farmers have much more monthly sort of costs that don't have a particular season associated with them. So it's based on what the farmer's needs essentially are. And also whether you're trying to help low-income members of the community spread their payments out instead of needing to pay an upfront payment. So there's all these things in balance. But the point is, you've committed as an eater to that period, whether it's a season or a year. And no matter what happens in the space of that time, you stay with the farmer. So if they have a tomato blight, you get over your tomato entitlement and you eat more carrots. You know, like so. That's one example, but the same for on the farmer side, that they are committed to feeding you for that period of time. They can't take your money and run, and they also need to continue, you know, with the educational aspects and the care for the community, no matter what happens. Or in the case of the pandemic, you know, I was able to support members who lost their jobs and say, well, we'll ride this out together and we'll see how we go in a few months, and can't pay, then that's how it works, because we committed to each other. It's not a one-way commitment. So I think that's probably the simplest way I can explain CSA in short term. Did I cover it well enough, Nick?
I think you did, and you've touched on a bunch of topics that we're going to dive a bit deeper into. What I might do now is let our other two presenters and then yourself introduce themselves, and then I'll move into some questions if that's all right. So, Dan, would you mind introducing yourself, mate?
Yep. Thanks very much, Nick. Yeah, also excited to be able to talk to you all today. As for us, we're reasonably new farmers. So we've got 140 acres in the Hinchinbrook region, which is between Townsville and Cairns, for those familiar or not familiar with the area. In terms of what we do on farm, we breed, farm, and slaughter and distribute summer-led pasture-raised chickens, as well as a bit of sugarcane that we do on a rotational basis with the chooks, and just starting to delve into some more tropical veggies as well. So that's pretty much us in a nutshell.
Fantastic, mate. I'm going to ask you some more questions about your operation in a minute. Can I throw to Ant now, please?
Absolutely, yes. Hi, my name's Ant. I run Tellurian Fruit Gardens, which is a certified organic fruit orchard in central Victoria, which is Jar Jar Wurrung country. So about 2.5 years ago, I did a 6-month internship with the previous owners of the orchard, and then I took over it. So it was an established orchard that I've taken on. I've now been running it for 2 years, and I introduced CSA in my first year running it. I'm also a member of the Harcourt Organic Farming Co-op, which includes a micro dairy, a market garden, a fruit tree nursery, and an online fruit growing business that are all based on the same property. So I've got about 4,000 fruit trees, and I sell mostly through CSA and farmers markets, but then also through the farm shop, pick your own online orders, a little bit of wholesale, and some ad hoc orders as well. Yeah, that's me.
Fantastic, mate. And I'll get Tammi to introduce herself properly now, though we've already heard from her.
Yeah, I'll be brief. So Tammi from Jonai Farms and Meatsmiths. We are small-scale pastured pigs and cattle, and with an on-farm and also a small crop of garlic and chilies coming to a greenhouse near you soon, near me soon anyway. And with a butcher shop on the farm where we do all of our own butchering and cooking of small goods and things. And we're obviously a CSA, and about 90% of our produce is sold through the CSA and about 10% through our farm gate shop, and a range of workshops that we run as well to teach meat literacy, and also helping other producers run very small scale farms and remain viable without having to grow.
Wonderful. Thanks, Tammi. Now, I've got a few questions for you guys before I throw over to the wider group. I'm actually going to hit you first, Tammi, though. In our preparation for this session, you expressed some opinions beyond the definition of CSA that you just gave about what is and is not a CSA. Do you want to expand on that a little bit before we dive into some of the other topics?
Yeah, sure. I think that there's a bit of confusion sometimes about what CSA means and whether an aggregated box system can be a CSA. So there are a lot of box schemes around, and some of them are wonderful, like Food Connect up in Brisbane, and really admirable enterprises, but we wouldn't call those CSA. So community supported agriculture is where the community is supporting the farmer very directly, not a whole bunch of farms through an aggregator. So aggregated meaning bringing together many farmers in one box system instead of having them selling individually. That's not to say there aren't some multi-farm CSAs in the world. Of course there are, but they're operating again still directly communicating with their community of eaters. And in the global not just food sovereignty, but in the global CSA movement, CSA farmers are fairly fierce about protecting the language of CSA, because you have box schemes that are not beautiful like Food Connect. You know, there are ones that are less ethical sort of enterprises, and they just want to bring food together, sell at a premium to people and make it really convenient. And that's just not what CSA is. So we like that there are many models for selling good produce in the world, and we just want ours to still be protected as CSA.
Yeah. Well, Thanks for that, Tammi. I think that's actually a really, really important distinction. And then I guess there's also a distinction. As a farmer myself, I don't operate a CSA model. I am supported by my eaters in many amazing ways, and some of them are online tonight. But my model isn't a CSA either, because there's no risk sharing. It would be my argument. So look, I might dive a bit into your operations. Ant, if I can throw to you first, mate. What drew you into offering a CSA model rather than any of the other sales models that are available? And can you fill us in too if you do anything other than a CSA? So if you wholesale or do any other models of selling?
Yep, it was a no-brainer to me, really. I mean, I'm passionate about creating change in food and ag systems, so it just seemed like a really clear way to make that happen while also reaping the many benefits of running a CSA and offering those benefits to my potential members. So I guess I was pretty keen on it from the start. So, and yes, as I mentioned, I do have other sales channels. CSA and farmers markets are my two main ones. And then I've got a whole bunch of others: pick your own, farm shop, wholesale, ad hoc orders and online orders. And that can present a bit of a challenge sometimes because of the size of this farm, or this orchard, I couldn't possibly have all of the produce going into a CSA. So I do maintain those other channels, but CSA is my sort of number one priority. And because one of the principles of CSA is that risk sharing element that goes both ways. So if there's it's kind of sharing in abundance and adversity as well. But because I have all those other channels, it's like I have an apparent abundance all the time because I've got quite a lot of produce. And so it's a challenge trying to find the line of what is the produce that's going to my CSA and what's the produce that I can sort of send in another direction. Having said that, as I said, my number one priority is those members, because they are sharing that risk with me and showing that commitment. So yeah, basically that's it. Oh yeah, the rest of that, I'm going to try to reduce the size of my orchard as well to solve that problem.
I saw a question just flash up in the chat about what the split is between your CSA and the other things you do. So of the totality of what you produce in your orchard, about what amount is CSA versus other channels?
Probably, I would say around about 2 to 3, yeah, maybe 2/5 CSA, 2/5 farmers markets, and then all the other channels go to 1/5. Yeah, but it really depends on the season.
Yeah, so still quite a significant part of your farm enterprise.
Yeah, and I've only been doing it for 2 years, but so far the CSA has always received a much higher value than what they sort of paid for in the beginning. So I'm always trying to make sure that one is fully stocked first.
Yeah, excellent. I might throw to Tammi now. Tammi, can you tell us what your impetus behind going to a CSA model is, and whether that's the only thing you do or whether you've got other sales channels?
Yeah, so for me, the CSA was a no-brainer. Having been a member of a CSA in California 25 years ago. No, it is 20. We were members of a CSA in Santa Cruz, and I loved the system. I loved the idea of supporting a farm in that manner, and the quality of the produce and the education we were getting about heritage fruit, and there was just a whole bunch of benefits. So when we came up to the farm, going on 9 years ago now, we knew from the beginning that would be the model we would pursue, because I was already an activist in the food sovereignty space, and I was committed to transforming not only how we farm ecologically, but also how we farm economically. So I think that the sort of transformations I'm hoping that we're all here to fight for in a solidarity session is in the way we relate to each other in exchange of goods as well. and cutting multinationals out, cutting the debtors out, like all of that system, not wanting it to be part of what we did at all. So that's why we crowdfunded the boning room and the commercial kitchen many years ago as well, because instead of taking on a debt to a bank where we would be supporting the shareholders, we would much rather have a debt to our community that we paid back in meat rather than in interest, on top of the money we borrowed.
I'll park that one because I'm going to ask you more about that in a minute, Tammi. Dan, mate, you don't currently run a CSA, but you're about to. Tell us how you currently market your produce and what your decision-making process at the start was that you would sell direct, or how you do sell, and what your considerations were in moving to a CSA. Because I think we've got a bunch of folks online today who aren't CSA who might be interested in starting soon.
Yeah, it's quite a few questions in there, Nick, but I'll try and start. Current sales models. I guess we kicked off the business, and in our region, CSA is relatively unknown. So there's no growers I know of in North Queensland operating under a CSA. There's quite a few veggie boxes. There's quite a few sort of aggregated veggie box delivery models, but CSA wasn't well known. We also have some challenges in terms of distribution in our regions, but right now we do 2 markets in our region. One of those is about an hour and a quarter south of us in Townsville. We do that once a month. And then we do another market once a month in the Atherton Tablelands. So that's about a 3-hour drive north. We sold about 70% of our product through those 2 markets. Had a few customers that would do home deliveries to on the way through, but generally it was through those 2 markets. 30% of what we did was to the restaurant and the resort trade in North Queensland. And that was, of course, was up until COVID. That all changed quite rapidly. What were the other bits in there, Nick? I guess, why are we looking into CSA?
Yep.
So it's probably only become really apparent. We've been thinking about CSA for quite some time. It's become really apparent with COVID and the massive demand we're seeing for our products. And it dawned on us that how do we keep supporting those folks that have supported us for the last few years? So we want to keep feeding people that want to enjoy our products, but we've had that issue of we've got a lot of people that really would like to eat our chicken now. We're a no-growth business. We don't want to get bigger than what we are. So how do we make sure we can keep feeding folks that want to support us and support what we're doing? And CSA really is it. It's setting up that mutual relationship that they become part of our farm in a lot of ways, and we really become part of their dinner table. And it's not just, for us, it's not a commercial transaction when we sell somebody a chicken. It's when we hand over that stock, it's like a member of our farming family per se. We hate to hear if people sort of overcooked it or something went wrong. We really take a lot of pride in what we do, and we want people to enjoy the chicken as much as we enjoy producing it and distributing and sharing it with folks. So that's where CSA is really starting to gel with us a hell of a lot more, that we can set up those relationships and manage through the good times and the bad. So I guess what held us off with doing a CSA early days, getting away from the whole capitalist mindset that it's our farm, it's our risk. If things go wrong, it's our fault. We're the ones that should bear the brunt of that. And also when things go fantastically well, we're the ones that reap capital rewards. That's not what we're into. We want to be able to share what we do. We lived vicariously through quite a few farmers before we moved on farm 4 and a bit years ago, and we supported them as best we could. But when things got really tough for those guys, they didn't have a CSA model, and the community pulled behind them reasonably well, but not in the way that I've seen Tammi's community pull around her when they've had farming issues. They're worlds apart. It's really just a complete different model. It's not just a slightly different way to sell. It's getting the farmer and its eaters to think about what they do completely differently. That we're in it together. So when it goes fantastically well, everybody reaps the rewards and does really well. When it's tough for the farmer or when it's tough for the eater, we still all pull together. So we already follow a lot of principles like Tam. We've had a few of our eaters that have found themselves out of work with COVID. and we still deliver them chicken every month when we do our delivery runs. So it's really about community.
Dan, that's an amazing story, mate. Thanks for sharing that. That's inspired me, to be honest. So I've got a question for the two farmers here, Tam and Ant, who currently do CSA. Dan's made a decision now to move to a CSA model. I would love to move to a CSA model myself. How do you do it? How do you manage that shift from here? I've got some stuff. You know, I've got an eighth of beef. I have a kilo of apples. Give me money. How do you move from that really transactional relationship with your customers, even though it's a friendly, mutual transactional relationship, to a CSA model? How do you have that conversation with your eaters?
I think Ant and I will probably have quite different answers because of the experience of the two farms and how we made the shift. So it should be interesting to hear the differences in a long established farm that serviced farmers markets and wholesale markets, and then shifted to so much of its focus on CSA. That's Ant, compared with us, you know, who came up here fresh and wet behind the ears and like, yeah, we're going to run a CSA. and we did actually do one very sensible thing in our case, which was for the first year of selling meat, we were alerting people to the fact that we were heading towards being a CSA, that was the plan for the future, but that we felt that it was responsible to see out the first year of risks, to understand them ourselves, the changes in supply and demand, not understanding what might happen in production. We felt wasn't a risk we could ask others to take with us because we were really quite green. We hadn't done study, we hadn't done lengthy internships with people. Like, we came over like, we're going to farm. so we felt we should take the risks on our own for just that first year at least to do a full 4 seasons. But in the meanwhile, we also offered all of our meat only through a box system. So you didn't have to commit to anything, but every month you could buy a bag of meat. And it was mixed cuts from the beginning that I chose what went in. You could express some preferences, but I didn't have to meet them. And then you could order individual cuts on top of that, but there was a commitment to getting whatever was, so that kind of, what is the principle about accepting whatever produce you're given, was built into our box model in the beginning anyway. And then we also, when we shifted to CSA, we didn't do it all or nothing. We actually offered shares alongside the ad hoc selling system. And that, I would say, we let go for too long because there were those who were sitting on the fence and they didn't commit because I didn't ask them to. As soon as we said we were nearly full in memberships, we had a waiting list overnight. And that had taken, 18 months to fill the membership because I didn't push for the commitment. So, that's the story of how we did it. And I actually think that was a good way, except I should have asked for commitment earlier. That's all.
Yeah, that's it. That seems like a really important lesson, actually, that we shouldn't, we produce amazing food. We do it in ethical ways. Our stuff has value. Our story has value. We shouldn't be afraid of asking people to commit to that.
Yeah, and I guess because we'd still only been farming 2.5 years into when I'd had the CSA shares open for nearly a year, I still felt reluctant to ask for that big of a commitment, like to demand it. But I think by the time you've been farming 2.5 years and selling meat for 1.5 years, or whatever produce you sell, you have a pretty reasonable understanding. I think you can start to push for that commitment more at that stage.
Yeah, great. And how about you, mate? What was your experience in moving to a CSA model?
I had a different experience to that because I started CSA in the first year, and so I just kind of dived right in. Tellurian Fruit Gardens was born in July, and I was selling shares in August, and then I was delivering shares in December. So it was very quick.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, I think in spreadsheets, so I just made about 7 overly complicated spreadsheets to try to work out all of the finer details and how to, you know, what price to charge and where I was going to deliver and all those things. And then I just jumped in, and it seemed to work really well. I mean, there was plenty of minor issues that I worked out along the way, but that was all fine. I think I did a lot of communicating with people, trying to sell the idea. I feel like there's kind of two levels of things that people find attractive in CSA. That there's the sort of systemic benefits in terms of you know, building new economies and creating local resilient food sheds and encouraging agroecology and all that sort of stuff. And then there's a direct benefits to the people. You know, they get priority access to my fruit. So there's some varieties that only the CSA members get, and a whole bunch of other things that are sort of direct benefits of the CSA. One thing that I sort of struggled with, I thought it was a bit much to ask people to be committing for a whole season to me in my first year running a farm, running a business at all. I thought that was a really big ask, but at the same time, I thought, well, you know, we really need more and more small scale farmers, and this is how you do it. So I was clear, I tried to be clear with any potential members and say, you know, this is my first year and I'm going to make mistakes, but I'm going to do the best I can, and hopefully you can support me through that, and I'll still be here in another 10 years.
I'm going to grill you about those mistakes.
Nick, I'd love to comment on Ant's.
Yeah, go ahead.
Besides letting everyone know that you're listening to a very handsome farmer here, I'd just like to say that Ant is also, I think, one of the best CSA farmers I've ever seen. So in that asking for a big commitment while you were just starting the CSA, you definitely had a proven production model and great mentors to continue, you know, supporting you in the farming enterprise itself. And the CSA itself was very much about how you would manage it. And you were we're one of Ant's CSA members, by the way, and he's one of ours. So I know exactly how he communicates with his members because I am one. And he's an incredible communicator. He's clear about his letting you know what he doesn't know, and that you're committing to somebody who's still learning certain things. So I think it's an incredibly transparent ask for the commitment. And if you think, oh, he's too new to this, I don't want to commit, that's up to you, because he's given you all the information that you needed to make that decision. So I think you were not just brave. I think you were also really like operated with incredible integrity. You know, I love watching your CSA grow. You're very good at it.
Oh, shucks. Thanks, Dan.
Oh, you guys. So this is fantastic, and I've heard a few sort of really important key points about how you ask for that level of trust from your readers. And I saw a comment in the chat a moment ago about what do we recommend about someone who wants to upskill from a direct marketing or a farmer's market point of view to moving to a CSA. And I wanted to drop a bit of a spoiler for later. We're going to run a session for AFSA members, which is a bit less overviewy and a bit more hands-on for farmers who are not currently CSA but want to move to that model, where we can actually get on a video chat and spend a couple of hours planning with you. And invites for that will go to AFSA members very soon. So just stay tuned for that. Where do we want to go from here? I want to touch briefly on something that Dan actually mentioned. You know, I'm a Queenslander along with Dan, and you know, one of the things that you could, I guess, cynically say is that for Ant and Tammi, you guys live within an hour or so of an enormous city, 5 million folks. Dan lives between two regional centres of, I'm thinking about 150,000 persons each. Do we think that the model needs to look different when you're selling to a smaller group of folks, or when you're committing to a smaller group of folks who live a long, long way away from you? I'm wondering if any of you guys have got commentary on that.
I certainly have thoughts on that matter. yeah, the proximity to a hungry city of 5 million people is obviously an immediate bigger market, literally, and super close to you. So that made it easier for us, I reckon, when we started. You know, we had orders for pork before we had pigs on the ground, and they were from Melbourne, so because they'd watched our journey out here. So it's different. But then the flip side, I guess, like just thinking about what a CSA is, it's small. We'll talk about scale further, I hope, too. We only have 80 members. So you're talking about you only need 80 households. And what we found when we were building the membership was that Melbourne sold out immediately, but we run 2 cycles. We run a metro and a regional one. And the regional one took longer to fill. So our region is still, you know, pretty well populated. It's not like there aren't many people around. We've got Ballarat's only half an hour away, and the Central Highlands itself has like 115,000 people in it or something around the place. But of course, a lot of them grow their own food too. Bendigo's only an hour away. So in building the region, I found it fascinating how much slower those memberships filled. And one thing I worked out is that rural people are a lot more self-sufficient, and that was part of the reason why they didn't need our food as much. Also, lower socioeconomic status for quite a lot of the region, and so there's that. But over time, that demand grew until I got to 50-50 regional metro. And I mean, in my ideal world, we would drop Melbourne and just service the region. Sorry, Melbourne. But it's not my ideal world, because I want Melbourne to be fed from farms that are only an hour away like us. And so our commitment to still feeding the city needs to remain, like in terms of the principle of what we do. But I think in Dan's case, yes, he could definitely be a CSA. In fact, when he talks about the distances of the 2 markets, an hour and a half and 3 hours away, when you're a CSA, especially meat, because it's non-perishable, once it goes, you know, you can freeze it. Unlike fruit or veg, which has different considerations around storage and length of time you can keep it. For us, we can freeze and deliver once a month, and then that 3-hour trip is not such a big deal. But if you're having to do that every Friday, that's a much bigger deal.
And how about you, mate? How does distance affect you? What do you reckon?
Yeah, I'm very similar to Tam. I've got 100 members, and the same. Half of them are in the city and half of them in the region. You know, certainly there's different challenges that your location is going to present, but CSAs are so diverse, and you can really tailor a CSA to your situation, to what you need. As you know, there's a core set of guiding principles, and that's it. But there's just so many different ways you can do that. You know, in Dan's situation, you might want to, you know, if you're traveling massive distances, you might want to know that you have enough members to make those distances worthwhile. So you deliver enough products in one go, and yeah, I mean, I think it's entirely possible.
Yeah, excellent. And I mean, it's a powerful point that, you know, whether you want a really deep commitment with 80 folks or a casual commitment with 8,000 who walk past you at a farmer's market, I guess. Before I move on, I'm also conscious of time, guys. Sorry. Before I move on, Dan, have you got anything to say about that? How did it play into your considerations?
Yeah, for us, that was probably one of the reasons we held off in launching the CSA up until now. So making sure that we had enough eaters in. So we're looking at running it as 2 regional areas, so the northern and southern region, making sure we actually had enough eaters in each of those regions to be able to support the model. And yeah, we're really fortunate that we do freeze the majority of our products, which does give us that flexibility where we can do one run a month and deliver folks meat for the month. So yeah. For those that have to move fresh produce, it's certainly much more challenging if you are geographically dispersed. The last delivery run we did north and south, we covered about 5,000 square kilometres that we delivered to. So it's quite a big day when you get out there and drop off all the food. But when we go to the CSA, we're going to do something similar to what Tam and I'm guessing Ant might do as well. We've got several drop-off hubs instead of home deliveries. But
Yeah, amazing. And that nuts and bolts stuff is stuff that we should get into when we do the hands-on session, I think.
Mm.
Can I move us on? I want to talk a bit about solidarity. I think it's obvious to anyone listening the solidarity that is inherent in an eater sharing risk with the person who is growing their food. But can you guys tell us of any examples of your members expressing solidarity with you expressing solidarity with your members, or your members expressing solidarity with each other? Tammi, I know you've got a recent and good story to tell about this. So do you want to shoot first?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call it, well, it is a good story. It ends up a good story.
It's a terrible story, but
yeah, and it's, you know, it's all on the internet if you want to read the details. But the short version, for those who haven't heard it, we were away in January, and a former farmhand made a mistake that led to led to acute acidosis, and ultimately the death of 15 of 23 of our cattle. It was a devastating loss, obviously emotionally as much as anything else, but clearly going to be a major economic blow to us at the same time. And we, we reached out to the community saying, you've signed up for a beef share, and we're not going to be able to meet the kilos we've promised you for the foreseeable future until we can afford a new herd, because we not only had the money of the lost animals, we now had to come up with money for new animals, and it was going to be quite a while, to be honest. And I think anyone who follows anything Joe and I does knows we're pretty community minded, and we live in a very wonderful community, Ant and I both do here, of supportive people. And our members not only turned out in droves for us, some offered to change from monthly payments to annual upfront payments so that we could afford the cattle more quickly. One offered to do 5 years upfront, and I was like, really? Come on, John, you know, that's just too much. And he said, what do you mean? I'm ensuring my own food security. So
what kind of commitment is that, Tammi, if you don't mind me asking?
Sorry?
What financial commitment was it for 5 years?
For his share, 5 years up front would have been over $6,000. It was not a small offer.
Very significant.
And out of like being risk averse, but also not wanting to push him to, you know, stretch himself like that, we took 2 years up front as a, you know, we hedged it. So we thought, it just felt like too much. And our supplier actually, so members did all kinds of wonderful things offering to help. And actually another one signed up like 9 of her friends to one of our workshops, so that because we said if we got the workshops filled quickly, we'd be able to buy animals sooner. And so she signed up all of her friends to come up for a workshop, which of course, because of COVID, wasn't able to happen. But we did a Zoom session, and they'll all come to the farm when we're allowed to again. And then, yeah, our cattle supplier, who we get our weaners from, he actually also offered to replace the lost steers with older heifers and cows that he was culling from his system, so that we would still have animals of the age that we slaughter more quickly. And he sold them to us at exactly the same price that the steers were worth, even though they were worth far more. And he did it on terms, so that we don't have to start paying him back until we start slaughtering those particular animals. So there were so many people who came forward and did kind things for us. And we were completely back on our feet within about 6 weeks. Like, it was the most incredible turnaround we've ever had. And the feeling of support from having it was like, you can imagine what well, you know, Nick, because we talked about it. It was bad. But the emotional support and the kindness and the fact that we actually recovered so quickly was pretty incredible. And in return, we've had other things, not as bad as that, but we've had other things where they've supported us similarly kindly and followed through on that risk sharing model. And so we have a principle: whenever we have abundance in meat, everybody's bags are going to be overweight every month. Not so much that we're encouraging too high a meat consumption, because we're not fans of that, but always, you know, if you've got a 6 kilo share, you're going to get 6.5 kilos or something every month. And if it's, you know, if we know it's your child's birthday, you're going to get an extra roast to celebrate. And as I said, when some people didn't keep the jobs in the pandemic, they're still getting meat. Yeah, we do what we can to pay them back, knowing that there could be a hard time for us again as well. So we should all just look after each other whenever we can.
Yeah, and I mean that's a fantastic story of solidarity, even though it was a terrible time, you know, for you as a farm to go through. And I mean, I've done farmers markets, I've sold at farmers markets, and it's wonderful to meet people, and you always have a great time and a great conversation with people. But it's not solidarity like you have just discussed. And mate, have you got any stories like that?
Luckily for me, I haven't had any major setbacks like that. I've had plenty of, I've made plenty of smaller mistakes, and had, you know, poor harvests on particular varieties. I've had no apples for the last 2 years. And my members have just been awesome. They've just been so willing to accept what they get, and then at the same time celebrate it and evangelize on my behalf and get people to sign up and all that sort of stuff. So it's been really, really great. I get lots of love from members and lots of emails of appreciation and that kind of thing. But I think one of the best things that I'm excited about in terms of solidarity kind of in my CSA is that I had open pricing for my CSA shares. So I set a minimum price, and then I gave people a suggested price. But I just let them decide what to pay. It's the idea being that the higher income earners could subsidise a lower cost share for the lower income earners. And that was really scary to do that, to open it up to the public and just say, hey, pay what you want. But it worked. It worked twice. 2 years running, some people chose to pay significantly more than the suggested price, and some people paid the minimum. But the average that came out was exactly where I wanted it to be. So it was great.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
We've had a question, and it jumped to something that I wanted to ask as well. Let's talk more about relationships. I want to ask this in two parts. And Dan, I'd be interested, even though you're not running a CSA yet, I'd be interested in your answers on this as well. I might go to you first, but can you talk more about the relationship that you've got with your eaters? And a thing I'm particularly interested in, because I've seen it developing amongst the eaters that I feed. What are their relationships with each other like? Are you connecting folks as a farm who would not otherwise be connected?
Yeah, we're starting to see a bit of that. We've got really good, strong relationships with quite a lot of our eaters, us directly. And now through sharing recipes, we're starting to get a bit of connection between them. But certainly not growing the community and building those interrelationships as well as I'd like to just yet. I think until we really get the CSA happening and start, it's difficult, especially based on our really spread out geographic regions. It's difficult to get those relationships between the customers happening, unless they bump into each other at the markets or they comment on a post or something. But once we get the CSA going and we have sort of dedicated on-farm days with the CSA, and also trying to get more involvement with our CSA members on the farm, because they're not just investing in a chicken, when they're investing in us and our farming system and what we do, how we do it, in the relationship. So once we really get the CSA up and happening, I think we'll be able to foster those relationships better between the members.
Sweet. And tell us what you do to build relationships, mate.
I missed most of what Dan said because of my internet, so I'm not sure I can respond to anything that he said. But my CSA is probably lacking a little bit, to be honest, in this area, just because I've been so busy running the farm and learning how to run this orchard that I haven't been able to focus a lot on bringing people into the farm. Having said that, I do allow some people to work on the farm in exchange for their shares. So that's one way that I'm getting to know my CSA community. I did last year host a gathering on the farm after the season, but I was just a little disorganized, so I had a small turnout. I have held a working bee, but again, I was just a bit too overwhelmed and didn't organize it super well and had a small turnout. And then this year, obviously, COVID happened, so I couldn't have that gathering. But going forward, I'd like to just try to make that happen a little bit better, to be honest. I'd just like to have maybe some more workshops or just general gathering days where people can come and share food and have a tour, and I can have that face-to-face relationship building.
Yeah, fantastic, mate. Tammi, can you fill us in on how you build relationships?
Yeah, I mean, we have some really strong relationships with our members, especially those who've been with us for the 6.5 years now that we've been a CSA. The relationships between them are probably, it actually largely ends up being dependent on the hub. So some of our hubs are very communally minded as well. And so like Kemi in Footscray, like she's a community builder herself. And so all of her members are, do things together, and they talk about sharing other produce, and they share recipes. I think some of, they become quite good friends. Whereas the hubs who are more like just happy to help, but not available to help develop community, aren't able to do that as much. Having said that, I mean, yeah, one of them does yoga with my mother-in-law because they're our hosts as well. And she's a great CSA member. One of the things I was going to say about our relationships, though, the regional ones in particular, of course, because people are closer and many of them pick up from the farm gate, those are the strongest relationships for sure. And
yep.
We do produce exchanges. Gary always brings us his quinces, and when he does his passata making, he brings us all of the skins and seeds to feed to the pigs. And Craig brings us his tomatillos because he grew way too many, and so I can make all my salsa verde. And in exchange, I give him some jamon, or Stuart built him a pump. And there's a lot of this kind of very meaningful, I guess, relationships in terms of we do produce swapping beyond the CSA itself, and also recipes and, dinners together. Gabby's here and has just become a friend, so started as a CSA member, but we're mates now. And so I think, the relationship part is really strong between the farmer and the eater. I think probably I see Robin's here from Transition. Her members pick up from the farm. So I'd be pretty interested when we get to Q&A to hear what Robin's relationships are like amongst her members, because they have a lot more physical contact. And we actually do an open day once a year, and that's where some of the relationships have also started and become real friendships. But we only do them once a year, so I think that's harder to develop strong relationships between the members themselves if you don't do it more often, like Robin does with her pickups.
Fantastic. We've had some questions about social media and a few other things, but I want to just hold those over. I want to try and finish my questioning pretty soon so I can pass over to the audience. So those of you listening, start thinking of your questions. I'm going to throw to you in a couple of minutes. Someone asked more about my farm, and I will never, ever pass up an opportunity to talk about myself. So I'm just going to shoot to another thing. I run a very small operation. We're only on 20 acres here. My model is not CSA. I direct market grass-fed beef, free-range pork, and pastured eggs. The model I use for that is that I market only on social media. I've got a private Facebook group, which is the only way you can get our stuff. And, I am turning off 3 to 5 head of cattle a year, 15 dozen eggs a week, a couple of pastured, a very small operation here. And that's what I wanted to throw to, actually. One of the really key facets of a CSA model is appropriate scale. I can envisage how CSA would work at my micro scale. Can I get the more experienced farmers, Tammi, Ant and Dan particularly, to talk about how big they think CSA can appropriately go? I mean, Because ultimately, right, our goal is to replace capitalism with these solidarity economies. Do we need to make really big CSAs feeding thousands of people each, or do we need thousands of medium-sized or small CSAs? Tell us more.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, it was a pretty obvious question, but and give us your view on that.
Well, I've got 100 members. I've had that for 2 years now, and I'd like to have fewer. Maybe 90, I think, is probably the sweet spot for me. I'm sure there are massive CSAs in the US. I think there's some with hundreds of members, and so I'm not really sure where the upper limit is. I don't know if I could put a number on it, but I think if capitalism has taught us one thing is that there is an upper limit, and that things tend to change when they outgrow themselves. So yeah, I think, we were talking about relationships. So in a system where there's two farmers, one farmer or two farmer, or even a few farmers, but thousands of people, it's going to be pretty hard to really build meaningful connections, I think, and maintain them over time. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. I think, I think your scale is the ultimate CSA. I think really small is actually great.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a balance where production is not enough to pay my mortgage, so there's a balance there as well. But I'll throw Dan to you, mate. What do you scale? I mean, you're not Ingham's chicken. You're not producing 1 million meat birds a year.
No, we might live in Ingham, but yeah, definitely not Ingham's chickens. For us, we do need to be, our CSA needs to be a certain size to support what we do. We've got some pretty high fixed costs. So on farm, as well as the breeding flock of birds we run, we've also got an abattoir and the licensing costs that go with that. And then also then the refrigeration and chilling, which in this climate freezes for a lot of power. So we need our CSA to be large, and well, our CSA and our other sales avenues to be large enough to support that. Do I think there's an upper limit? Absolutely. We look at it about, it's a personal relationship between us, the farmers, and our eaters. So I think as soon as you start diluting that and getting away from the actual people working the land, working the soil, being removed from the eaters, yeah, that's where I start challenging, is it a CSA anymore? So.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Tammi, give us your opinion on that.
Yeah, I think it is complicated in terms of there are ways to do a larger CSA. I've been on one up in China where they have 1,000 members and they have an incredible community of farmers working together in a co-op and getting orders out to, like I said, 1,000 members. So, and it looks to me like it's genuine. They're working really well with their members. But I would say that's a definite exception to what I think of as the kind of CSA rule. Elizabeth Henderson, who's one of the pioneers of CSA in America from Peace Farm, she reckons, and it's kind of broadly in the global literature around CSA, that 100 is about right, like no more than about 100. And that's based on the notion of how many relationships one farmer can happily and successfully maintain. And if you try to think about maintaining a strong relationship with more than 100 people, it's hard, right? Most of us wouldn't name 100 friends that we feel close to. We name a few. And if you're talking about something that's not your closest friends, but it's the people you feed and you want to keep educated and you want to hear from them what their needs are, and you're going to have a lot of communication with those people. So to be able to communicate regularly with them and have a sense of who they are and what they want from the experience as well as you, then more than 100 is going to be probably too many. That's not to say, I saw Emma Kate from Food Connect mentioned that, there's room for all kinds of models. And I agree with that. There are other things like what Food Connect does to aggregate, to bring together all these other farms, get their produce into one place and get it out the door to people for whom a CSA isn't going to work. And for farmers for whom a CSA model isn't going to work. I saw Richard Cornish mentioned earlier that he thinks the personality of a farmer makes a difference to whether you can run a CSA. And I think to a certain extent that sounds uncharitable, but he's probably not entirely wrong, because you have to you have to be able to maintain relationships. You know, you're not just here to take their money and say, you signed up. So, you know, you need to actually be somebody who's prepared to be communicating a lot and be charitable and be generous. When somebody gives you critical feedback you don't like, you need to be really friendly about that. So in the case of like Food Connect, they can do that for, I don't know, however many, I don't know how many farmers they're actually managing. Emma can probably tell us. But they're managing that communications around the farming for a lot of farmers who maybe don't want to do it themselves anyway. And they can still crush capitalism with that being part of our food systems transformation. You know, they've already done it by crowd sharing a shed.
And I've seen a lot of comments come up about co-ops and things like that. And there's a million ways to smash capitalism, and we're going to talk about all of them over this series. I ask one more question and then throw it over to the audience, which is, what are the potential issues with going to a CSA? Have you guys made any mistakes that we can learn from, or seen other CSAs make mistakes that we can learn from?
I mean,
and you go first, then.
Yeah, as I said earlier, I haven't had any major setbacks. I mean, something that's really challenging is to ask people to share the risk with you. You know, it's one thing if there's a natural disaster and you lose a lot of crops. You know, I think that's, to ask to share in that kind of risk is fair, but I think it's tough to ask when it could be a mistake that you make. You know, I think that's a real challenge with CSA. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have any more to add. I'll think about it. Throw it to someone else.
Oh, so I thought Nick was going to actually intervene, but no, I'll keep talking. Okay. I think in terms of the mistakes we've made, you know, it's all on the internet. You can read every mistake I've ever made pretty much. And one of those was when we had the fertility crisis in 2016. There was a mixture of nature at play, but also our own management choices that we weren't experienced enough to see the fertility crisis looming until we were in the thick of it. And it certainly, we didn't make the pigs infertile, but we didn't help with some of our choice about when to replace the breeding herd and things. And so being just really honest and open about all the things that happened is why I think the community stuck with us, because we didn't bullshit about it. They had the option not to stick with us if they didn't want to. But they did stick with us. Mistakes I've seen, though, I guess, from others, and it's not just CSA farmers, but I think it's really hard when you work as hard as a farmer as all of us do to accept criticism or querying on your price, or asking why the produce is a certain way. You know, like in Dan's case, he controls it at the abattoir now, but I know plenty of other poultry farmers whose birds come back really damaged from the abattoir. And then to have to deal with, in the case of a CSA members, in the case of a farmer's market, you know, customers saying, oh, I mean, why do you want me to pay that much for something that looks like that? That's really demoralizing. And I think it takes a fair bit of strength to hear those things from people who feel like they're undermining you and like sort of not valuing what you do. And so one of the hardest things I think that a CSA farmer has to be really good at is copping shit on the chin and actually just going, yep, it's not ideal. It's not as good as we would like it to be. Or in the case of where you think they're wrong, how to say that without saying, you're just being a dick, you know? You have to have a better communication skills than to tell people when they're dead wrong. And I actually had an example of this recently with somebody who we had to deliver meat frozen because of COVID, and we lost our feed supply. So we needed to clear the paddocks more, and we decided to do 15 pigs at once instead of 6 and have a month's supply frozen, and do that until the pandemic lifted enough that we got our feed supply back, because we're paying a fortune now for feed. And so if we can clear paddocks more quickly, then it's better. So they go in the freezer for longer, and it means your delivery will be frozen. And somebody actually said, well, that's a real problem for us. If it's frozen, what am I going to cook for dinner that night? And I can't get crackling from frozen meat, which, by the way, is false. But my response to that was, well, I'm sorry about that, because it's going to continue for a couple of months. And if frozen meat is a problem for you, then I don't really know what to do, because it's what it's going to be for the next few months. And the response was, I can't stand this drama. And I really support CSA, but I can't, we're going to have to cancel the subscription immediately. And I just calmly responded, okay, then that was your last delivery, and good luck. So, you refrain from saying all the things you're thinking. You just,
yeah. I feel like add, yeah, you go ahead. Sorry, mate.
I've had similar experiences. I have received negative feedback, or even just questions. They're questioning, why did you do that, or why did we not get a delivery but food went to the farmers market, and things like that. And so I do my best to really be super clear and explain all of my thinking and how I came to make a decision. But there's definitely a point where you can just say to someone, look, I just don't think, maybe this is not for you, sort of thing. And I've only had that happen once with one person that was consistently giving negative feedback. And I did my best to try to appease them, and then got to a point where I just said, look, I'm happy to offer you a refund if it's just not right for you.
and
I think the thing I was going to say also is that I do a big survey at the end of every season as well. So just to give everyone another opportunity to give any feedback they need, or ask any questions, or make suggestions for next year, and that kind of thing.
I think what both of you have said ties really well into a comment that one of our AFSA members actually made in the chat, which was from Echo Valley Farms, which is about, telling your story builds the relationships. And if you're doing a good job of telling your story, people are not surprised when the issue arises, and they're on that journey with you, which I think probably helps when you have to have those tough conversations with people. Guys, I'm going to stop asking questions and throw over to the group. I'm actually going to, so what I want to do, the way that we want to do this is for you guys to ask questions. I would love you to turn your video on and put your hand up if you can. And then we will go to you and we'll unmute you, and you can ask your question. And if I could actually start the ball rolling, hopefully you're okay with this, but Victoria Johnson asked a question a minute ago about the scale of Ant's CSA, and a comment he made about wanting to reduce the size of it. Victoria, would you be happy to turn your video on and ask that question to Ant?
Here I am.
Hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey. Yeah. I sort of posed that question because the issue came up about what are some of the challenges with CSAs. And you said earlier on that you were thinking about decreasing the size of your orchard, but you also said you were thinking that maybe your CSA was a little bit too big. And I wondered if you could elaborate on that a bit, because that might help us understand some of the challenges relating to that.
Yeah, I think the main reason is just that I'm a single farmer, and 4,000 trees is just too many. That's kind of the main impetus for wanting to get smaller. I'm working 16-hour days, 6 days a week from November or December until February, and pretty much broke me this year, so I can't do it again, so I'm going to get smaller. Shrinking the number of shares kind of just goes hand in hand with that. I just felt like, I think it was just at the limits of my capacity to be packing 50 boxes twice a week. It was just too much. So I just need to have fewer to stay on top of it.
Sounds like a good management decision.
Yeah. I've also just trying to do some thinking around what sort of income do I need, and then how many shares do I need to have to make that income, and then anything else on top of that I can potentially get rid of to improve my quality of life.
Yeah, excellent. And farmers are very hard at making those self-care decisions sometimes, Ant. So that's actually really good that you're doing that. And thanks for the question, Victoria. Who else has got a question? Does anyone want to switch their video on and stick their hand up?
Pressure.
Unmute that. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, mate. Stephen, go ahead.
Yeah. Look, I asked the question about, I haven't even had a chance to look at the website or anything, and it's entirely new. It's just a referral, so very interested in what I've seen so far. My question was, because I do a very similar, well, I have for about a decade now, apart from my full-time job, I've been developing quite a comprehensive approach to both the production of food across a whole range of food groups, as well as the exploring the marketing models. And so CSA may be something that I'm definitely going to look into as well. But the question I had was, with current events as they are, it would appear that there never was a time to get or to capitalise really on the current climate, with folk seeing that food security is now paramount. And so I think I'm on the same wavelength anyway in regards to that. Would that be right?
That's a really good question, Stephen. And actually, I think something Dan said earlier about the way that his business mix had changed due to the pandemic. I think you might have something to add on that. Dan, do you want to shoot on that, mate?
Sorry, I was halfway through saying goodnight to the kids as part of that question come through. Can you just recap that very quickly for me, Stephen? Sorry.
Oh, look, just the way things are going. The word capitalism was mentioned, which I found surprising. But my personal passion, I suppose, is exactly, it seems to be in line very much with what I'm hearing, and that is the bringing back food security to local regions, and I've developed models in that with that in mind. So, am I correct, I guess, in what I'm hearing is that CSA is very much, it seems, well, even if you could just clarify the crushed capitalism, whatever it was you were saying earlier, to me, so I know where you're coming from with that one.
You want to tackle that, Tam, or are you happy for me to delve in a little bit? This is
I mean, I can go straight to the crushing capitalism bit, but if you want to answer the bit Nick was talking about with the shift you've made in the model recently because of the pandemic, I think that's it would be a really valuable personal input.
Yeah, so for us, definite huge shift there. We had about 30% of our trade that was restaurants, and we never really wanted restaurants to get big. We capped it at that level, because we're not a growth business. We've got a certain size we want to get to, which we can run as a family. We can have good, close relationships with those we feed. And we thought our product is a reasonably expensive product when you're talking chicken. So average sale price is talking $23 a kilo for a whole bird. So it is an expensive buy for most folks. But the high-end restaurants really do like it. They're worlds apart from the other children. Of course, as soon as COVID hit, that was 30% of our sales gone. As soon as they announced restaurants are closing, we had some orders that were going out in the next few days, and that dried straight up. But our eaters, our direct eaters that we're selling to at the markets, our sales went from being 70% of our business, obviously, to 100%, but the demand for our product tripled in that sector. But we don't want to get to a size where we can feed all of those people. That's too big for us and what we want to do. So in terms of capitalism, a true capitalist model, we just keep growing, feeding that demand. We've had folks from Brisbane, Sydney, everywhere else wanting to buy our chicken. And like Nick's a classic example. He's asked if he can buy some of our chooks down there. We've directed them to a closer grower to him, doing the same birds. It's not in our interest to feed the world. We just want to feed our community.
So I think though
Tammi,
that Dan has actually answered. Yeah, Dan's already partially answered like how this stuff is going to be crushing capitalism, right? Because when farmers like Dan suddenly have an increased demand directly from eaters who are prepared to commit and support him in these solidarity economies, and he is he's like in the mindset of the solidarity economy, and he says, okay, so now I'm full. That's all I can supply, and now I can support the next poultry farmer who can be the next supplier for that waiting list. Like we have a 20-year waiting list for our farm, and we intentionally leave it open so we can direct them to the other small-scale pig and cattle farmers in the region, and then they come to me for particularly other proteins, but also fruit and vegetables. And I say, oh, go to Ant, oh, go to Angelica, wherever you are, go to that local farmer. And that's how we start crushing capitalism, because instead of us buying into there's increased demand, I'll increase my supply, and we go to the bank and we take out another mortgage to get more land and start supplying that need. We don't do that at all. We say, oh, their CSA isn't full yet, or they're not even a CSA yet, and maybe they could be. How do we direct that demand to the next farm, and then the next farm, and then a young farmer comes up and they're ready to go, and so you send them a waiting list full of people who want to buy that food, and you multiply, you don't scale. And I think that's how we start to crush capitalism. And then in the larger scale supply, you have the likes of Food Connect and Open Food Network's way of connecting all the farmers to the eaters as well. So there are all these ways that people are combating capitalism with direct local economies that are working in solidarity, like the CSA. Not all of them are solidarity economies, but they're at least direct economies. They're not capitalist economies.
Can I add, please?
Is that you, Corn Dog?
Yeah, it is. I mean, cut off. But yep. Hi. Yeah, I just want to add, Tammi. Yep. How can we establish lots and lots of people in the city who could actually engage in CSA? So we have lots and lots of people who are buying stuff direct from farmers into the city, who are avoiding all the other channels. And so we can have lots and lots of people in the city buying from farms directly, because at present, there's a lot of stuff in the way.
Yeah. I mean, the farmers markets have been doing a good job of trying to connect, but that's a pretty small population of food buyers in the scheme of things, though it's been growing for, the 15 years or whatever that farmers markets have been growing in this country. But I think if you look at, we've mentioned Open Food Network, they, after in the face of the pandemic, saw like 100 new farms onboarded in the first month of the pandemic, I think it was. It was a lot of farms who'd been selling through longer chains, came on board to sell directly to households instead of through wholesale. And of course, to Ant's point, when you stop selling through wholesale, when you sell directly to households, you can reduce how much you sell, because your margin is higher on retail. It's not going through a wholesale system. So we can all get smaller and feed less people and have more farmers to feed more people, if that makes sense. And Connect is another very good example of feeding the city through much more direct and meaningful relationships.
And Tammi, there are so many people in the city at present who are demanding that closer relationship. And what they are wanting is people like you to buy from. And everyone we're talking to, they want to have that relationship. And so there are so many people who want to go, yeah, I want to buy from you guys. And that's what we need to achieve.
Yes. And that's why we're trying to get more farmers to go CSA for so long, because they too could be supplying that desire.
Guys, we've only got a few minutes and I see a million more questions. Can I call out someone who's asked a question in the chat? S. Beer, you had a question about how you determine your scale before you start. Mate, would you be happy to jump on the video and ask that question?
Yeah, I can. I was thinking about it probably in relation to Ant, because, like you said, he didn't have the history.
His shops
coming back because he started the CSA model straight away. Just looking at when you're starting a CSA model from the start, how do you work out what your shares should be, or do you just build them up? You know, set a number and then continue to build.
I think the more astute thing to do is probably to have a clear idea of where your limit is. I don't think I did when I started, because I thought I would sort of slowly grow it over a number of years. So I set what I thought was a really high bar at 50 and said, I'm going to aim for 50 shares. And thinking that I'd be able to grow that a little bit more over time. And then I sold like 95 shares in the first year. So it just kind of blew up and went really quickly. And then I stopped it because it was about to get too big. Yeah, so.
Do you think that's because you're, you know, there's not that many fruit and veggie CSAs in this region? Like, do you think that, like, you know, there's a bit of a hole here for that, like in Central Victoria?
Certainly in the way of fruit, I think I'm the only fruit CSA. Well, I might be the only one in Australia. I couldn't find any other ones, but that doesn't mean they're not there. Yeah, that could certainly be one of the reasons why it was very popular. Also, I did take over an established business, so there was an existing sort of customer base. There was a whole bunch of people that were already following this farm. So, but yeah, I mean, in terms of actually deciding on a number of shares that you want to start with, you know, it would be too hard to put a number on it, but because it would depend so much on what you're doing. But I would just think about how much capacity you have to deliver to hubs. How many hubs do you want? You know, maybe that's a better place to start. How many hubs can you potentially deliver to, and then how many eaters in those hubs could you have signing up? Yeah, I'm sure there's lots of different ways to go about that. But maybe we can get a little bit deeper into it in the next session.
Yeah, I'm really excited about doing this more detailed session where we can drill down for folks who want to move to that model. We've got time for at least one, maybe two more questions. Does anyone else want to fire away?
I just want to jump in and
just say it's not Emma Kate.
It's not Emma Kate, it's Robert. Fantastic session, Ant, Tammi, and Nick. Really great to hear the sort of things that you're doing. And
I am in the background, but I'm in my 90.
I could turn the video on.
No, don't.
You know, I was a veggie CSA farmer in Tasmania in 1999 and ran that CSA for quite a while, and then helped quite a few of my ex-dairy farmers or other dairy farmers who are wanting to diversify their operation. And the multi-farmer CSA only come to me because there was a lot of farmers who said, geez, I can't grow 30, 40, 50 things, you know, sequentially, weekly, to satisfy the, you know, the consumer behaviours at that time. And this is obviously pre-Facebook and pre a lot of those social media outlets. So it was a tough gig for any farmer who wanted to set up a CSA back then. So that was where we, you know, and it was because I was pretty wedded to the traditional CSA model, you know, one farmer or two farmers working together. And the multi-farmer, when these farmers kept coming to me and saying, I grow 4 or 5 things, why don't you find another farmer who grows all the 4 or 5 things that I don't grow, and so on and so on. That de-risks the situation for me. And if you can sell 4 weeks boxes in advance and a whole bunch of other things that embedded in the principles of CSA, we could, and it's a very deep set of thinking around how do we scale the model in the Australian context, bearing in mind there was about 1,200 CSAs in the USA at the time who were already starting to practice competition and be competitive in their behaviour around just there was a whole bunch of sort of market behaviour that was existing in the USA, and I thought, well, Australia can really start to leapfrog that, and because of the lack of population, and a lot of farmers were more than, particularly in Brisbane, there's a lot of farmers who are 1 hour or further away from the city, we could put a model on the ground that was a multi-farmer, and you know, we're at 80, 100 farmers or so now that could, because the one thing, being a pretty good communicator, someone who likes people, I didn't realise there was a lot of market gardeners out there and veggie farmers out there who actually didn't like people, and they wanted to have someone else who actually could represent them on behalf of those people. So for us, there was two types of farmers: farmers who wanted to gain confidence and get the skills and experience to run their own CSA, and they could come through us and get those contacts and those networks, and we would provide them with the restaurants and whatever else to get through. And then there was the other farmers who said, you ripper, I'm just going to concentrate on growing my 4 or 5 or 6 things, or maybe 8 things over time, and work with other farmers in solidarity with those other farmers to deliver to a city base far bigger than I can do, and obviously on a relationship base where they could trust a whole bunch of things. So that was to answer Corn Dog, Richard. That's to answer your question, Richard, about how we scale the operation whilst empowering other farmers who want to set up a CSA and go micro and have really diverse operations that you know, basically kick ass and bury this neoliberal market operation that's going on. Can
I jump into that?
Yeah.
Sorry, mate. We're just a bit limited on time. Sure. One facet of what you've been talking about, which is how we can cooperate between CSAs, I think is something we should jump right into in the AFSA members session that we run quite soon. There's some awesome examples of people with an existing CSA adding other farmers and things like that. The second part that I really noticed from what you said is about competition. And, you know, I mean, if we end up with competitive CSAs undercutting each other on price or whatever, we are really just engaging in our own subset of capitalism, which is unattractive to many of us. And that's a more difficult question. And I might quickly throw to Tammi on that one, and then we might wrap up if that's all right.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, and one we've thought deeply about.
Tammi, what do you reckon about competition between CSAs?
Yeah, I think competition is shit, and I think that we need to just stop being that way. Like, you know, we don't have to engage with that at all. I'm not interested in making the best bacon in Australia. I'm interested in everyone having fucking good bacon in Australia. So I think that if we all had that mindset of supporting each other and wanting everything that we do to be normal for everyone to have access to this kind of stuff, that it would be better. And we all benefit from not being competitive, from giving everyone around us a leg up. There's no downside to supporting each other. So
that's such an important point too. I mean, there's 25-ish million Australians, 24,700,000 and something of them are buying their food at Coles and Woolies. Our competition is not each other. Our competition is recruiting more people to our cause. Yep. Can I finish on a point very similar to that? I mean, I hope you guys have found this discussion really informative. I've found it amazing. I feel like we've just scratched the surface of where we can go with CSAs. As I said, we will absolutely do AFSA members session about CSA, where we can have a smaller group, drill right down into your questions about practically how you move to that model. But ultimately, our goal as an organisation, AFSA, is to do the amount of people doing this type of thing and to remove barriers for us doing this type of thing. And I know I said this at the start, but I'm going to say it again, and I'll keep saying it to everyone. The only way we can do that is all together as members of a well-resourced organisation that's going to fight for our rights in this matter. So if you're not an AFSA member yet, please get on AFSA. Keep an eye out for our next Solidarity Economy session in 2 weeks' time. The topic of that one will be collaborative economies with the totally rad folks from Open Food Network. I really hope to see all of you guys there. And look, please engage with us on social media. We're very active on Facebook. You can check out our website and send us a message and become an AFSA member. So look, on that, Thank you very much for all your questions. Thank you very much for your participation and your time. Look, I know we're all busy people and we don't always have an hour and a half, but I appreciate it. And thank you very much. I'll hand over to the three of my co-presenters wrap up and say goodbye.
See ya.
Thanks everyone for coming. It gives me enormous hope to see this many people come for a conversation about CSA and taking, you know, advantage of an opportunity to really grow solidarity economies in Australia. I think I look forward to the rest of our series. I look forward to seeing more people collectivize and join AFSA. Also join your local stuff, like just, you know, be excellent to each other. Thanks.
Awesome, folks. Thank you and see you later.